So Defcon 9 years ago, 10 years ago, I was sitting at Defcon. I got invited to be a judge on a social engineering competition. I sat in the audience and was quickly appalled because the contestants were calling random college girls and getting them to give their credit card numbers over a live phone. And there was many nefarious, none of you looking people in the audience writing down those numbers. I can only imagine what occurred after that. If any of you were sitting in my speech a moment ago, you know that is not leaving them feeling better for having met you. So I got asked by Defcon to start an SE competition. And I formulated what we called the social engineering capture the flag. The way it is designed is we pick random target companies. They do not know that they are targets. That's a question we often get asked. And we developed a list of flags. Flags are bits of information that people will have to obtain. Those flags do not contain things like passwords, IP addresses, or file names. They contain things like who does your dumpsters? What is the name of the PDF software that you use? What operating system do you have? Those flags have been vetted through the FBI. We then pick random contestants that apply to be part of the competition. Those contestants are given a target company, which they have 3 weeks to do Ascent on and produce a good report looking for those flags. That becomes almost half of their score. Then they come to Defcon and they sit in a glass booth, and in front of the hundreds of people in a room, they make live phishing calls to this target company while we all listen. Fortunately, we've had teams of lawyers make sure that we're doing nothing illegal. The first year, we do, actually, that's not a lie. The first year we ever did it, I got called into Washington, D.C. by the Department of Justice because Apple and Microsoft said we were about to bring Armageddon. Yes, that was a true story. So I went to the FBI and I handed them all of our stuff and said, here's what we're going to do. And they went, bless you, my son, you may continue. They did not say that. Just for anyone here that works for the FBI, it wasn't like, you know, es padre. No, it wasn't that, okay. They basically said we can't do anything, so it's all good. So how did we get here? This panel is not about me. It's not about the competition at Defcon. Okay, it is about these three people. Out of the last 9 years that we've run, 8 years that we've run this competition, we have had 14 people per year enter the competition. Only 14 because of the time constraints, right? We're in PST time. We only have a limited amount of call time that we can do. We do it Friday and Saturday. As you can imagine, Saturday calls are more difficult. And we invite these people in to compete on this competition. The first year we did it, our room that Defcon gave us was literally, I'm not kidding, half the size of this room. And I will take a moment to brag. We are the first and only competition in Defcon history to be given a black badge in year 1. So I got to say I'm pretty proud of that. That was because of what we did. We accomplished something with that competition that made social engineering educational, fun, and legal. And we don't target the personal information of the person on the phone. Right? I don't want to know it's April on the phone. I don't want her name. I don't even care who she is. I want information on the company. So it's not about the person, it's about the company. And we're showing why social engineering is dangerous. There's multiple aspects to it. They have to apply. They have to make a video nowadays. Some of them did not. They have to do Ascent, write a report, then show up, make phone calls for 20 minutes. So what we did is Patrick helped collect some of the previous people who have competed and some of them who have won in that competition. Last year was the first year we ever ran in that Derbycon. And we ran the CTF at a con, which I promised I would never do outside of Defcon because of the amount of work involved, but we did it. So let me introduce our panel. So first is Joe. Joe served in the Navy, working in submarines as electronic tech for 7 years. He's currently a senior security architect. He podcasts, he blogs, talks about all sorts of security-related items. He is the winner of the very first inaugural CTF at Derbycon 7, right?
Yes.
Derbycon 7, where we had 6 other competitors that he had competed against, and he took first place, which merited him, and this was not planned. This was actually quite impressive. Derby was so impressed with the competition, they actually created a black badge for our competition, and Joe is the winner of that black badge. So welcome him to the panel. Whitney Maxwell, she's a hacker for life. Now, you know, she wrote a really great bio of herself, but I'm not going to use it. And let me tell you why. So I'm going to tell you a little story about Whitney. So, Defcon, what was it? Defcon, let me see, did we write that down? Defcon, yeah, okay. Defcon 3 years ago. You can imagine how it is when you come into the SE. Anyone here been to the SE Village? Okay, so you stood the line, you've traversed your way into the room, right? And there's hundreds of people, and then there's that booth with the heat lamp inside. It smells of everyone else's body odor before you, and you're there, and you're like, I'm going to go into this booth in front of hundreds of people. Well, sometimes people don't show. Fear gets the best of them, and they run. Well, we had that happen 3 years ago. And we said to the audience, hey, we have a slot. We have somebody that didn't show. Does anyone want to stand up and just, heck, jump in the booth and make some calls to this target company? And Whitney went, I'll do it. Now, we've had this happen once or twice in the past, and generally the person, we give them tons of kudos, huge guts, right, to jump in that booth and do this, but they generally don't do too well. Because, you know, no preparation. Well, we gave Whitney 20 minutes to read the report that the person who got scared produced, and it was pretty crappy. It was pretty bad. It was a worthless report. It basically was paper with some words on it. And she took 20 minutes to read that. She got in the booth, and she took 3rd place based on points alone. Yeah. Yep. And I've been trying to hire her ever since. Now, I can't even introduce this guy. I'm not even going to read his bio because he is just amazing. Okay, Kirsch, I want to tell you, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I love this story. This man is an idol. He walks on SE water. Okay, let me tell you about him. He came to Defcon 24, competed, made a great video. We accepted him in, and he did bad. I mean, real bad. Like, bad. 0 points in the booth. Okay, that's how bad he did. Then Defcon 25 comes around, and he says, I'm going to compete again. And I'm like, oh boy, 0 points. But the video he made touched a very personal note, and he knew it. He SE'd me. He made a video that was the opening to Lie to Me, and it had his face, and he did all the things, and I'm like, darn it, and I worked with Ekman, how can I say no to this? But I'm like, okay, we'll give him a chance. He didn't just take the black badge last year. He had so many points that there was nobody even within viewing of his score. And I asked him, what did you do? He just went back and he made the determination that he was not going to let that failure define. And he's not in SE. He's a marketing guy, not an SE, right? And he said, I'm not going to let that failure define who I am. And he totally owned it. Kirsch, everyone. Yeah. So we got 3 great people here. Here's the way it's going to work. I've developed 5 questions I'd like to ask. This panel is not about me or any knowledge I have. It's about them. We're going to give each person 60 seconds to answer the question. These are not pre-programmed for their answers. Their answers are theirs alone. I do not know what they're going to say, so we don't even know if they're going to agree or disagree, and that's fine. After those 5 questions, we'll open it up to the audience. When you ask a question, I will ask one person to start the answering, and then we'll go through each person. So all 3 of them will have a chance to say an answer, okay? We'll try to keep it nice and formal and move it along so everyone has a chance. And because we are going to be chivalrous, Whitney, you will start with this question. What personality trait do you feel is the most important in becoming a social engineer?
For me, I was thinking about this, and there are many things that come to mind, but I think the most important one is being bold and being able to be willing to put yourself in potentially awkward and difficult situations and putting your inhibitions and your personal fears aside and doing it anyway. So I think being bold is along with, a lot of other things I'm sure they'll say, for me, being bold is the most important thing. And
you did that. Exactly that. Joe, what do you think is the most wanted personality trait for being a social engineer?
I think likability is very important. You need to be likable, but you also need to know when to be bold, when to be authoritative, when to be very humble or very, very meek about things. So basically, you just have to be able to turn it on and off, just to be able to understand your audience. To me, that's the biggest trait. Looking at your audience, your room, your target, not everything works with everyone. I mean, authority works with some people it don't. So knowing which way to go is probably one of the best personality traits.
Excellent. And Chris, what do you say is the personality trait that's most important to be a social engineer?
I think the ability to talk to anybody. So this relates a little bit to you, right? To what you said. I'll give you a little example. This morning, like how many people arrived at the wrong building here? All right, a lot, right? So I think Nick and I were the first people to arrive there, and we're like, where's this conference? And they said, well, I don't know. And we talked to this lady, and she's like, okay, I'm going to give you directions. Where are you parked? I'm like, I'm out in this parking lot, and we went in, like, it said, do not enter, but we went in anyway. And she said, you know what? I did exactly the same thing. And I'm a professor here. So like, I started out like, showing weakness, building that trust. She responded, right? Now we had a bond, and I'm like, oh, so it looks like we're both rebels here, right? So like, we built that rapport. So I think the ability to speak to people, if it's like the janitor or the CEO or the old lady on the train, just like go out and talk to people. I think that's what Jonathan said as well in his last talk.
No, that's a beautiful answers. Thank you for all three of those. Joe, I'm going to start this one with you. How important is OSINT in being a social engineer?
You need to have the context for the contact. And with that, you can summarize it as better OSINT makes better social engineering. So with regards to my experience in the booth, through my OSINT, I found that my target company had a Microsoft Office 365 email migrations issues phone number, and that's the number they got spoofed. So it was an internal number that people were seeing. And if they called it back, oh, well, that was the IT department, that would not even have cued anyone in that I was up to shenanigans. So with that, knowing what's going on, knowing, say, their insurance provider, if you're trying to fish them during open enrollment season, or W-2s, if they have an HR provider, knowing that, that's going to help you immensely, and it will actually give you better targets as well.
Nice. Chris, how important is OSINT in being a social engineer?
So I think it's crucial because what you're trying to do is become a chameleon in the target company, right? And the chameleon needs to take on the color of the background. If you don't know what color the background is, you're going to stand out like a sore thumb. So learn about the company. For my target company, I read everything on Glassdoor because I wanted to know everything about the corporate culture, their pains, their language, all of that stuff. LinkedIn was really good. So yeah. Just be immersed in that culture.
Yeah, wonderful. And Whitney, what do you think is how important is OSINT in being a social engineer?
Obviously, it's really important. I like to think of OSINT as the soap to get you out of sticky situations, because you will arise and people will ask you questions or they'll nod to something that they assume that you know, and if you don't know it, again, it's a sticky situation. But kind of nodding to my experience, I didn't have OSINT, and yet I did well. So it's not impossible to be successful without having OSINT, but my job would have been a lot easier. I wouldn't have had to do quite so much like on-the-spot thinking if I had been a bit better prepared. So it's not impossible, but it's definitely, it's a lot easier going if you have it.
And I'm going to give a shameless plug for Whitney. If any of you were not in the room this morning in track 2, she gave an amazing speech on using OSINT to develop something like a FICO score. Our personal, please say what it stands for. It's a PIVA, but what's it stand for?
Personal Information Vulnerability Assessment.
And it is a mathematical equation that weighs your potential vulnerability based on OSINT found on you. Truly phenomenal. So if you're interested in the OSINT theme, if you weren't there this morning, wait for Layer 8, I keep messing it up, to put out the speech on the web. It got recorded, right, Whitney?
Yes.
Okay.
And I tweeted out that full paper.
And you want to read that paper. It was truly phenomenal. You're welcome. I enjoyed it. Okay, let's start this one with Chris, if we could. What part of being in the glass booth made you the most nervous? And you can go with both years that you were in there.
First, I'll tell you my secret for getting into that.
Very good, very good, very good.
So, what made me most nervous in the second year was the first response from the target, right? Because if you remember the first year, I found private cell phone numbers for individuals, and I had very specific pretexts for them. And I only got one person on the phone. I found out that the lease for that company, was Palo Alto Networks, was up within like 9 months. They'd already built another facility that they were moving to. So I was spoofing the number of the real estate company that they were leasing from right now, and my pretext was to call up and say, hey, I've got a tenant who wants to visit on Monday. And I was calling the facility manager. I called him up. This was the only person I got on the phone. And he said, I don't know where you're calling me. We renewed the lease 3 weeks ago. So my pretext was shot. So when I went in the second year, I thought, like, I've got this beautiful pretext again, but I hope I don't get shut down like in the first sentence. Because if I get beyond the first sentence, I think I'll be fine, right?
And I will shamelessly plug, because he won't do it because he's too humble, every flag from one target, every flag, I think minus one?
Yeah, something like that.
It was every, I mean, we have like 40-some every flag on one phone call. He won the score with one phone call. The second phone call was bonus. It was fodder for the other people just to make sure no one can win. That's how good he did. Yeah. Let me move on to Whitney. What part of being in the glass booth, especially with no preparation, made you the most nervous?
I'm really sorry, Chris. That everyone would see me fail.
Ouch! Wow. She drops the mic and walks off.
I'm really sorry that happened to you. And I'm actually like, I still have that fear. It's going to happen to me.
That's fine. Once you've lost your dignity, you know.
Because anywhere else, like, you know, when I do it for work, if I have a bad phone call, like, it was just me, and I don't have to tell anybody, nobody else has to know, but to have the whole room watching you and fumbling and not finding the words, like, that was really scary.
People live tweeting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but you didn't fail, but I can understand why that would be nervous. And Joe?
Life after failure.
Life after failure. Now, you were at Derbycon doing this, but it was still a pretty big room that was pretty packed. We had a lot of people in there. What part of being in the booth made you the most nervous?
There were two things. One was I had only seen a couple of the calls in Vegas. Last year was my first Defcon. So I stood in line, I finally got in, I caught the tail end of one call. That was it. I didn't really know what to expect. And then through my OSINT, I found that their deputy CISO was going to be sitting in the room. So that was nerve-wracking.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that part. ¿Y nombres padre? No.
So one of my friends knew him from a professional organization and got eyes on him, and apparently he turned green.
Yeah. I understand why with that call.
Yeah. That's why whenever the COO got called and I was like, hey, we're calling the COO.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, that would make me nervous too. I'm glad I didn't know that when you were getting in the booth. Quickly moving on. Actually, that happened to me after one person got out of the booth at Defcon this year. A man walked up to me, slid his card across the table and said, "We need to speak." I looked down and it was the CSO of the company that just got totally pwned. And I went, "We'll talk in a little while." Okay. This one, I'm gonna start with you, Joe, if I can. Because you had so much success on the phone and you did such a great job at Derby, what do you feel was the most important aspect that contributed to your success?
A couple of things. I was very fluid on my feet, even though I was sitting in a chair. I was very fluid, especially when the guy started asking me about my SSO ID, throwing in the letter A. So when he's like, hey, there's no letters in this. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me put my glasses on. Oh, that's a 4. Being fluid in that response. And I actually took a prop in there. I walked in with a backpack. Chris knew what was in the backpack. There's going to be a backpack again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. No one knew what was in the backpack. I had my binder of doom, as it was called, that had all my notes on the targets, who to call, what the pretext were, anything with that. But then about, I would say 2 minutes into the first phone call, I reached down into my backpack and pull out a wireless keyboard and just start clanking on it.
It was a good pretext. Yeah, made it believable.
So, being creative, honestly. Being cheesy is good to get accepted. If you see my videos, you'll understand what I mean. But when you're actually in the booth, it's all about creativity and basically improv.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. Thank you. Whitney, what do you feel was the most important to your success when you were on the phone?
Chris and others have talked about building rapport, and I think for me, getting to that state of like being comfortable, where it's no longer a question, answer, you, then me speak. It was a conversation, and that made it a lot easier to be comfortable, and it seemed a lot less suspicious that I kept asking questions that I had no right asking. You know, like, oh, hey, like, do you have vending machine? Did you just get paid on Friday? Like, oh, I hope you're having a great weekend. You know, like, all these things that I didn't even know what the flags were, but I'm like, I think that was a flag. What's the wireless? Is that there? And like, I think being able to be comfortable made it really easy to keep going and just kind of, you know, thinking on your feet. But because we had that comfortable kind of conversation established, it wasn't awkward that it kept going. And then that was the only phone number that worked, and it was a security guard. And so I tried to find another number, and he transferred me, but then it didn't work. And so I called another number, it went back to him, and everyone was like, no! And so we shut down the phone call, and I was like, no, wait, put me back on with him. And then I got back, and I'm like, hey, so sorry, that's weird, like, it didn't work, like, and I continued the conversation again with the same guy, even though everyone else was like, no, it's bad, like, he probably's on to you, and it was just nice to be like, no, it's okay, we're comfortable, we can keep going. And so that made me a lot less nervous asking questions because it was a more natural conversation than, you know, tricky questions.
If I remember correctly, you did that 4 times. She called the same guy back 4 times.
Do you remember he threatened me?
Yeah, at one point he was like, why are you calling? Like, he got mad near the end, right?
Like, and I'm not being, I could tell he was like big and muscular, and yet was very nice.
He did sound like the guy from Green Mile, you know, the guy he sounded like that's what he looked like, you know, a really deep voice like Barry White. He's like, why are you calling me? And I was like,
really fun conversation,
yeah.
And he was like, you better not get me into trouble or I'm gonna find you. And I was like,
he did say that.
and I was like, I have people who will protect me, right?
Well, you didn't use your real name, so that was, and we were spoofing numbers. That was a positive, but you called, and even after that, I think you said, let's try one more time. And we're like, but are you really sure? Because he may eat you through the phone, you know, like, and she did. So I
didn't even know this till after. He had to mute the call because he kept giving information he wasn't supposed to over the phone that he didn't want everybody.
After he threatened her.
And
After he threatened her, he's like, okay, but now I'll tell you my social. And we're like, mute the phone. And my sound guy's like turning all the volume down, and she's in there, oh yeah, that's so nice. I'm like, stop, this is terrible. So, rapport though, that's your point. That was your point. She did an amazing job at it. It was beautiful. Chris, what do you feel was so important to your success on the one phone call that got the most points ever in Defcon CTF history?
So I actually had a method to how I maximized the points, right? I did my OSINT, and then after I collected the OSINT, I was thinking about, okay, what are all the different vectors I could take? I wanted to having miserably failed the year before not getting people on the phone, right? I decided, okay, I don't want to have individuals, like an individual person's phone number, because if they're not at the desk, I have a dial tone, right? Or I have a voicemail. So I wanted some kind of functional group phone number, but I didn't want anything that was too process heavy. No support lines, no customer satisfaction lines or whatever, because they follow a strict script. So I opted for, I had a big toy company, I opted for the retail stores, found retail stores that were open during the time, where the numbers were very hard to find online, so they didn't get a lot of calls from the outside, didn't expect calls from the outside, so it was more believable that it was an inside caller. And then I looked at all the pretext I had, and I looked at how many flags I can reasonably pack into one story for that pretext. Because some pretexts don't lend themselves to certain flags, right? So then I also rated the quality of the phone number and the quality of the pretext. How likely was I to succeed with that pretext? And I just did the math and went with the one that came out on top.
But I want to brag on Chris for a bit, because I don't know if his humility is not allowing him to really tell you the full story. He made it because the largest point value in the flags is to get the target to go to a URL. Now, the URL is something we have to own, which makes it social-engineer.org, right? That way, if they describe the blue head, it's nowhere malicious. The company, if they find out, they can't be like, you sent me to a bad link, it's just a website. But we give them points for that. We could have got you to go somewhere else. So Chris did something, which at first I was like, what is he doing? He says, hey, can you go to this internal address? And it's an address he knew did not exist. So they were going going to get a 404 page. So he goes, that's odd. You should be able to pull that up. Can you go to, what is it, this machine info? Or
No, so basically I told him, like, I wonder if we can reach that server, if you can reach that server, because we're having some networking issues. So I sent them to a server that didn't exist. Interesting,
Yeah.
like something.company.com,
Yeah.
right? That didn't connect. And I said, I wonder if you even have an internet connection. So I sent them to facebook.com, right?
Right.
Something that they probably do every day, but that's non-threatening. And that was to get the flag for, do they have web filtering for Facebook?
Yes.
Right? Actually,
Genius.
they have web filtering and for Facebook.
Yes.
So I got the two. And then next thing was, can I send you to this diagnostic site? And I gave them the SEO social engineering
Yep.
site. And they read back to me what it said, and I said, that's odd, they must have changed the URL. So I gave them a different one, and this is like thismachine.info, which gives you the browser version, operating system version, and some other stuff that would have been really hard for them to pull up and that they wouldn't know, right? Because this
It's
was
just
some
unbelievable.
walkie-talkie in the store.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's just unbelievable, right? Because think about the psychology behind that. Error, Facebook, I'm safe. Other page, that's odd. Now here's a diagnostic page. Finally, we got the diagnostic page, and they read off everything. Their OS, their browser, their plugins, their PDFs. I'm just going, stop! And then I'm going, wait, I need this. I'm going to use this in my company. Thank you, Chris. And another thing that Chris thought of that I thought was truly phenomenal is after Defcon was over, his call was so good that he's like, hey, he called me, he's like, why don't we recreate it as an educational call? So Chris and I got together. I may believe I was the target. Chris is Chris. And we remade the call, and it lives on the web.
It's on YouTube. What I'll do is I'll just tweet it out from
Yes.
the handle. It's Chris_Kirsch, Kirsch, and I'll just tweet it out.
Yeah, and I'll retweet it from Human Hacker after this thing is over. And you should see it. It really is beautiful. And what Chris did, his company, they put a lot of time into this. Every time a flag has been obtained, it dings, and you see a little flag count go up. So it's a very great piece of education for anyone interested in seeing the SECTF or competing in it and how to think through this. I thought that was just really phenomenal.
And also for people who are not working in security, it tells you not only the flag, but also why is this relevant?
Yeah.
You know, like, who takes out your trash? Why is it relevant?
Yeah.
And bringing that home.
Yeah, a phenomenal video. Okay, so for our fifth question, before we open up to you folks, and Whitney, I'm going to start with you again. Would you recommend the experience of getting into the glass booth with maybe more preparation to anyone sitting here?
Sure, definitely. I mean, it's a learning experience, and one of the things that I loved about it is, the positive side is if you fail by yourself, then it's just you. But if you have a really cool call, or if you have kind of a success, or you're learning about it, you're wondering if you're good, you're able to kind of think on your feet. When you have a room full of people who are listening on your call, like, your wins are their wins. Like, your disappointments are their disappointments. Like, they're there with you. It kind of seems intimidating, like, all these people are looking at me. They all have these expectations. And if I fail, like, I'm a disappointment to them. But everybody's, like, they're with you,
Yeah.
wanting you to succeed. No one is hoping that you're going to fail. And so it's really cool to be able to share that experience with a group of just random strangers that are all on the same side. And so I would recommend it, if you can prepare, if you can't, even if you can't, and you just jump in last minute. It's a neat experience just to give it a go. You have, nothing to lose.
That's great, thank you. And Joe, would you recommend the experience to others, and why?
I absolutely would, because I had done a little bit of phishing calls as part of my day job prior to the competition. I thought I knew OSINT until I had to do OSINT. So it really opened my eyes on the business OSINT. I could find anything about anyone for the most part leading into that, but the business side, I really struggled to get my bearings in the beginning, and then once I finally got them, it definitely opened up a lot of doors. So it's definitely a great learning experience.
Excellent. Now, Chris, would you recommend
I
it?
absolutely loved it. Even the first year round was fine. Because,
Now.
So it is a ton of work. Like the OSINT part will take people usually between 40 and 80 hours, right? So you have to put in that time. You only have 3 weeks to do that next to your job, right? So you have to be a little OCD to do that. For me, it was two things really. One is fear is a bad reason not to do something. And I keep telling myself that for different things. And second thing is social engineering tells you a lot about human relationships. So I work in product marketing, for example, right? And while I don't recommend that you social engineer, like truly maliciously social engineer your friends and colleagues and family, there are ways to motivate people to do something. Right? As product marketing, you have to influence the entire company, but you have authority over nobody, right? So you can't tell them what to do. You have to convince them. So I find that super valuable for everyday business and management and those kind of things.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to cheat and just ask one additional question, and we'll just go down the line. Joe, how has being part of the SCCTF changed you in any way, whether it's business, personal? Has it made any change in you?
It actually has changed me a lot. It gave me a lot of confidence, but it also brought quite a bit of humility in certain things. And with the confidence, obviously riding off the wave of that, the company I was with pushed me to do a lot of media type stuff. So I got published at Dark Reading. I spoke at RSA based on those experiences. So it definitely propelled me pretty hard within industry. And just recently, it got me hated on a social engineering panel. So
Yeah, sorry about that. Got hated on one.
I'll tell you all about it.
Okay. Whitney, how has being part of the SCCTF changed you?
For me, it was a really big change because at the time I was working for Microsoft on one of their red teams, and social engineering at the company was off the table. It was not allowed. And so when I jumped in the booth just last minute, I didn't know that it was something I was good at or that I had a talent for, and because of that, we were able to convince. We had an engagement, and I was able to do just a little bit of social engineering at the company, and at the time HoloLens hadn't been released yet, and I was able to social engineer my way into where it was being developed. They were really freaking out. They're like, you weren't supposed to go in that building. I'm like, well, but the guy was carrying bombs. He gave me his badge, so what is that going to do?
And now you work at Rapid7.
But what was neat was that it opened the door even within a company that was very closed, like, no, we don't do social engineering. It was able to at least open the opportunity to say, hey, there's still, our employees here still need training on this. And now it's actually something I do at Rapid7, and it's allowed me to kind of cultivate that a little bit better and just help people be better prepared. Like, I really enjoy it, so that's...
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, besides having the coolest black badge made from solid gold, that's not a joke, a black badge made of solid gold.
1 ounce of gold.
1 ounce of gold.
It's a better deal to go to Defcon for life than to sell it.
Yeah. Is it really? So how has it affected you besides that solid ounce of gold?
I think it taught me that it's worth taking risks, bigger risks, because I'm usually quite risk averse, which sounds crazy because going up like in that booth can be perceived pretty risky.
Yeah, I think so.
But and also I always had this what do you call that, like a minority complex, I think you call it. Being a marketing guy in security, I really love security and I read a ton about it, but I am not a techie in that industry, right? And so I always felt like people were saying, oh, okay, you're in marketing, you know. But now that I kind of feel a little bit more settled, you know, I can now lean back a little bit and say, okay, you know, at least I know one part.
Yes. So we have left them all feeling better for having met us. That's good. Now, let's open it up. If you guys have a question you'd like to ask, present it, and we'll go through the panel and see. Yes, sir.
What type of training or preparation did you do for the competition and then also for social engineering in general?
Let's start with an easy one. Whitney, why don't you start that one since you had...
I had zero.
Yeah, there we are.
I think even before, I had a little bit of a game plan, and my game plan was, I work for Microsoft. If needed, I have an @microsoft.com address. It was like thinking really fast. And I developed the pretext of update was pushed out, but I'm working on Saturdays because apparently it wasn't pushed to all your servers, and so now I have to make sure like which servers got it and which ones didn't. And even just having a little bit of a plan gave me enough courage to like sit down and at least like make the phone call and start dialoguing. So even having a little preparation that helped. So
And Joe, and maybe when you answer the question for the gentleman, tell how many hours did you spend in your report preparation?
So the Ascent phase, I probably put about 80 hours into it. Part of it was fumbling around, getting my bearings on the business side. And then even between the time I had submitted the report and the competition, I still gathered a bit of Ascent that could be useful in the booth. Sometimes things change and sometimes major events are announced that you can always piggyback on. But in terms of preparation for the just social engineering in general, I stumbled upon it because I was working on something in the academic world, and they said identify a problem within your field, and I read a bunch of reports and it said social engineering was a big problem, so I go off and do some formal academic research on it. So
Excellent.
purely accidental.
Chris?
So for the Ascent phase, Michael Basil's book, Open Source Intelligence, was the best, and I would highly recommend that to anybody. Apart from that, really very, very broad research on the topic. Listen to all of the social engineering podcasts. I went back I think 3 years before the first call.
I'm sorry.
Binge listen.
Nightmares with my voice in it.
I thought, I always get the title wrong. It's not all about you, I think it's the
Yeah. It's not all about me. The top 10 ways to build rapport. Yep.
Okay. That's a really, really good book, short read for rapport building. What else? There are some other not for the CTF, but generally I really enjoyed taking micro expressions trainings. That was super interesting.
Yeah.
I found.
Yeah. Excellent. Some good tips there. Yes, ma'am.
What is your criteria in selecting the target company for the competition?
So maybe you guys can help with that since you know a little bit about it. Joe, what was the criteria in selecting?
So for selection, Chris's company assigns it to the competitors. There's typically a theme. So for Derbycon, the theme was Fortune 500 companies in and around Louisville. Sometimes it may be tech companies, security companies, transportation companies, publishing houses, whatever. So it's typically based on a theme.
And Whitney, what was your theme? Do you remember that year? I can't remember off the top.
I remember who the company was.
It sounds like.
It was Dell.
Oh, sounds like Dell. So that year the theme was tech companies. That was the theme. And Chris, what was your theme?
So first year was security companies, which I freaked out over.
Oh yeah.
It was really hard. And the second year was gaming companies.
Yeah, gaming
And I
companies.
think the year prior was retail.
Retail. Yep.
Retail.
Yep. We did retail. So, so other criteria is they must be large. They must have phone numbers that can be called both Friday and Saturday into many, many hours. And we don't target individuals. We target the company as a whole. Those are the criteria. Yes, sir.
I'm curious to hear about from the gender perspective when you guys are doing these calls, person to person or a phone call. Does it get awkward? Where into it goes into flirtation area where it just changes tone and any funny stories about that?
Well, Chris, since you competed most times, can you say one of the rules that kind of stops that from occurring? Do you know one of the rules that? I was hoping you would know it.
I know that one of the rules is you can't use anything threatening. I'm not sure about.
Yeah, so non-sexual, non-threatening pretext.
non-sexual.
Yeah, right. Non-sexual, non-threatening because.
PG-13.
Yeah, PG-13. Thank you. That's another rule. Another no use of profanity during
No
it.
soliciting passwords.
No soliciting passwords. You're actually disqualified for those things. If you use any one of those things we just said, automatic disqualification. We had a guy once who got in the booth and threatened someone's job, and he got DQ'd right on the spot. I mean, just done. He would have won too because he had a lot of points, but he got DQ'd right on the spot. So yeah, we don't allow for any of that. Did gender play into your pretext at all?
I do feel, not just through Defcon, but I found that I'm typically more successful with men, just because maybe I'm just more comfortable being around male-dominated.
Or because we're stupid. Yeah, or because we're stupid,
Well, and it's hard because at some point you need to ask them to give you something. And I feel like it's easier for kind of men to want to come to the rescue of the fair damsel on the other side of the phone versus like middle-aged women are the hardest. Like I have had some of the phone calls that made me want to cry were because I was on the phone with like a middle-aged woman and who I was like, I feel like I just got like yelled at by my mom, and it like that was terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that it's a little bit easier for like young men are a little bit easier to kind of, they're a bit more relaxed. Females are just a little bit harder for me to like have an emotional connection with and get them to like give me answers. Like I can connect with women, but they don't always want to like give me the same amount of information that like men would. So for me, like the gender is more who I'm connecting with. But
Yeah. That's good. It's good. Yes, sir.
So I think you just hit on a point that I wanted to ask about. How important is natural emotional intelligence to be successful? Because for me, trust equals influence, right? So if you're naturally emotionally intelligent, you can kind of flip on a dime. You can have that kind of conversation with people and build that trust. Some people aren't built that way. Can you learn that? Or is it more the natural side of the house that helps you be successful?
So let's break that down,
You have a
Whitney.
marketing person, you have someone who's very much an extrovert, in the both of you. So you can tell it's kind of a personality.
So let's break that down into two questions, and Whitney, we'll start with you first. How important is emotional intelligence, and can it be taught? What do you feel?
I definitely feel that it's important in order to make the other person comfortable talking to you. You could even have, and I've seen this, men or like people, just anyone who are normally really confident just talking to another person, you put them in front of a crowd and you freeze. And they're saying, and they've suddenly forgotten English and pronouns and whole sentences. But they're an emotionally intelligent person. It's just they get the nerves and it freezes them up. And so I think emotional intelligence coupled with being able to like relax a little bit. And can it be learned? I do think it can be learned. I think it's a skill, and I think it takes practice, which a lot of introverted people may not want to commit to. But I do think it's something that can be learned.
So Chris, as a marketing person, do you think that emotional intelligence can be taught, and how important is it?
I think it's very important. I think if you're naturally socially awkward, you will probably have a much harder time, right? So I would recommend that you try and overcome that first before taking that second step. I do think it can be taught to an extent. There are people that are introverts, extroverts, whatever. I actually consider myself an introvert because like large crowds, parties drain my batteries, and one-on-one conversations or alone time refill my batteries, right? But I'm still very comfortable with public speaking. I'm comfortable talking to people and so on. One thing that I've taken up actually after I did the CTF is improv, and I'm now on level 4. And that one is really good for pushing your comfort zone and also for responding quickly to unexpected things. So one part in improv is your scene partner will tell you, oh, why do you only have one leg? And you have to justify it on the spot, you know, and have to come up with a good reason. And so that's really good practice, I find.
My answer to that is always, "Arr, matey." Every time. Yeah. So Joe, how important is emotional intelligence, and can it be taught?
It's very important, and I would say that while some people may have a natural talent or a natural ability to it, that could always be further refined, but for those who don't have that natural ability, it could be taught to a degree. I don't know if it may be to the same element, but to a similar degree.
Okay, excellent. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What are some of the other areas of study that you guys have used? You brought up, marketing, in general, or even improv, but sales, maybe military background, maybe your tech background. What have you kind of drawn from to further this skill?
Let's start with Joe. What have you done to further this skill in your education?
So whenever I was doing the formal academic stuff, I actually spent more time in psych journals than I did tech journals. Other things, just to list a few reading materials if you'd like. Anything by Dr. Robert Cialdini is gold. Start with the book Influence. It's going to give you the 6 principles of persuasion. If you're a salesperson in the room, aka a social engineer trying to get someone to buy something, that's a good place to start, because quite honestly, salespeople are really just social engineers and vice versa. That's a great place to start. You could also break down any interaction you've had with big box retailer, car salesman, anything with that book. I want to echo the Michael Basil statement. If you want to know Ascent, that's where you go. His website, Intel Techniques, is good, as well as Ascent Framework. Those are pretty hot places to go. But for additional education, if I could finally get an employer to pay for it, I would probably take the APSE. And then SANS also has a 2-day social engineering course, and EC Council's got a 1-day course that I won't shamelessly plug right now.
Excellent. Whitney, what other education have you taken to advance here?
These are not going to be as like awesome sounding, but I still think they're valuable. I found that just looking for it in maybe sources you're not necessarily expecting. We were at Disney. Promise there's a point to this, and we were standing in line for the Peter Pan ride, and there were some little kids behind me, and they were talking about like what Disney princess they would be. And so I turned to my husband, and we were kind of smiling, and somewhere in the middle of like discussing Disney princesses, I was like, oh my gosh, no, I would be a villain. If my life was a Disney movie, like I would be the villain. They have pets too, so that's cool. But like, I was like, yeah, the queen in Snow White, like she was an amazing social engineer. She like took on the whole disguise. She had like the apples. Like she really, like she was pretty awesome. So just being more aware of seeing it in everyday like film, music, movies, things like that. And then the other source that I started looking to was actually religious texts. Because when you look at, things all throughout the Bible or the Talmud or, any source, you always have, a villainous character like Satan or something who's trying to get good people to do bad things. And I think a lot of those techniques still resonate true even in today's technological world. And so I've just found that by opening my eyes and just looking at things that are more commonplace, or those things are still there. Those, all those methods and trickery, you can kind of start picking them up if you just kind of keep an eye out for them.
So become a villainous witch and read the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know where we go for this, but Chris, if you would like to add anything to the Bible witch, I would be more than happy to take it.
Okay, I'll drop that. It's going to be hard. I'll go with fortune telling.
Oh boy. This is
There's actually a really good book by Ian Rowland.
love him.
Called The Art of Cold Reading. And he doesn't believe in the cards or astrology. It's like in the intro he says like that's all bullshit, but here's how you fool people, right? So that one's a really interesting read. One thing that's outside of the industry, if you're doing a lot of phishing emails, and those kind of things, check out marketingexperiments.com. What they do is they have Google Ads, marketing emails, and so on, and they do A/B tests and test out which message converts better, right? Now, that sounds pretty much what we're trying to do with a phishing email, right? And they discuss it in a podcast, and I'm not sure if it's still the same guy, but when I watched them like 2 or 3 years ago, the guy speaks about marketing conversion optimization like a Southern preacher. It's weird. Right?
Can I get an amen?
And last thing, this is not really a source, but something that I've branched out of. I'm in marketing, so I'm already on the dark side. So I've actually collaborated with our people in sales and taught them about social engineering, and specifically not about the bad things. Don't lie to people on the phone, but here's ways to build rapport, here's ways to influence, those kind of things, and to keep people on the phone. And one of the things that they tried out, I gave them a list of things to try, and the one thing that they all came back with that works the best is the artificial time constraint. And so
The best.
saying like, hey, I saw you just downloaded this white paper. I've got a meeting in 5 minutes, but I thought instead of sending an email, I'd just check in on you and see if you needed anything, right? So I'll call him out, like, Nick's over there, can you raise your hand? Hi. So he works in sales and he's tested a lot of these things. So if you want to hear what works, what doesn't work, chat with him afterwards and learn.
Yeah. So, guys, we are just about out of time. So, this was a great panel. But before we close, let me just finish with one story, if I have a minute, for the SECTF. Things that can only happen at the SECTF. A man that competed one year got into the booth, and he had a company, target company. I don't want to mention names, but let's say it rhymed with AT&T. And I'm being secure here. So he went to the site, and he looked for a person in their employee page, because they have their pictures of their employees that looked like him. Because he said, if he looks like me, maybe he'll sound like me, and I'll make believe I'm this guy. He found a guy in their ID department that looked like him. He then made his pretext that he was going to call people during the CTF, tell them that Defcon was going on. They needed to make sure their computers were updated because he knew they were a target. So he did. He was being very successful, getting lots and lots of flags, until he hit somebody that knew the real Adam. Started texting the real Adam. Hey, dude, why are you calling us about Defcon? I thought you were there. He goes, I am. Well, real Adam came out 2 doors down from the SE Village, walked in, and real Adam was not a small man. And real Adam walked up to the table in the middle of the call, and I went, it's him. And just pointed into the booth. And I have a greatest picture on earth on the seorg.org website of the real Adam and the fake Adam hugging after the call was over. And these are the things that happen at the SECTF. We have a wonderful time. We have an inviting room that has the same code of conduct as you have here. We don't tolerate harassment. We don't tolerate profanity, pornography. And I think it's a very positive place where you could see the effect on the people who have competed. These 3 people have done amazing things in their lives before and after the CTF, and it has a really positive effect on the industry and educating people on what social engineering is. So let's give it up for the